Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me check my volume, make sure I am up. I had to rewatch the video one more time. So, first I want to thank everyone who helps the channel. You guys are absolutely appreciated. You guys keep this little engine that could ticking along. Alright, good. So, there's a cat who does Star Trek videos. I really like his channel, Steve Shives. Now, Steve Shives, you're going down, buddy, because you made a video on Star Trek going after the Prime Directive. Now, I am going to assume the position that the Prime Directive is dramatically important and that your video on this particular topic is wrong. Now, I say this in the best of spirit and the best of faith, and I say this to some degree with this kind of a jovial Star Trek debate. Those Star Trek debates that you have in a coffee shop with somebody who's cool as hell. So there's no ill will or ill intent or anything else behind it. I love your shows. So let me make that very clear, crystal clear, pinned down, that type. But on that being said, trashing the Prime Directive, buddy, you would not get added to Starfleet. You would not get part of my ship. And just so you know where I'm coming from, look, I have rank, buddy. I have rank. I'm going to argue that the Prime Directive is paramount. Not just paramount, dramatically important. And just so you can hear what the Prime Directive is, I'm going to let Captain Picard himself explain it. He can explain it as better as anyone else, as good as anyone else. Ultimately, the idea of non-interference. We won't interfere in pre-warp societies. Take a listen to Picard. He gets a little snobbish here because this creates certain complexities, and this is essentially what Steve was going in on, essentially making the point that the complexities become so great that it becomes somewhat difficult to follow it. I disagree. I think he's looking at it from the wrong vantage point. The Federation is in part of rational human beings. We're not there yet. And their reality is different than our reality. Let's take a listen to Picard, though, and let's let him explain it. And I'm not going to play this because I will probably get a copyright strike. What I will do is, I guess, show scenes.
When the Felicium runs out, the people of Anara will suffer horrible withdrawal pains.
Alright, and just so you can understand what's taking place. A ship is found in space. There's cargo on that ship. You find out that there are two races of people from different planets, and there's this weird relationship as a junkie to a person supplying the junkie. Picard, this is done under the pretext of an illness. So imagine if someone had heroin and they think that they have some disease and that the heroin itself is the thing that gets rid of the symptoms of the disease. It's not a disease per se, it's the drug. So it's kind of like that with this kind of grandfathered in idea that they need this particular drug in order to live, and the only place to get this drug is that particular planet. And you come to find out that's not really true. They can live without it, but at this point they go through withdrawals. And the question becomes, should we tell them? And not just should we tell them, should we help them synthesizing drugs to essentially help with their withdrawal symptoms so this predatory relationship doesn't continue? Now, Picard is essentially saying, no, we can't do that. That breaks the Prime Directive. We can't interfere. He uses it in a particular way in this episode where he doesn't, I don't think he allows them to get the drug, if that makes sense. He just kind of, the other race wants to give the drug away, and he's like, yeah, hands off, we can't do it, we can't interfere, we have nothing to do with this situation, you guys need to figure this shit out on your own. Now, he's in the elevator with Beverly, being a bit snoopy about it, but let's hear Picard mansplain the Prime Directive to Beverly Crusher.
No doubt they will pass.
That seems so cruel. We could have made their burden easier.
Could we have? Perhaps in the short term. To what end? Hold. Beverly, the Prime Directive is not just a set of rules. It is a philosophy, and a very correct one. History has proved again and again that whenever mankind interferes with a less developed civilization, no matter how well-intentioned that interference may be, the results are invariably disastrous.
It's hard to be philosophical when faced with suffering.
Believe me, Beverly, there was only one decision.
I just hope it was the right one.
And we may never know. Resume.
All right. He explains it. It's philosophy, non-interference, etc., etc. You get the point. Now, let's go to Steve Shives, because Steve Shives covers this very specific one and goes into other ones. But I kind of want to make a point for the moment. Take away the technology, take away all of the techno wizardry and sorcery, and bring it down to real world terms from the standpoint of the way we interact in our particular society. Just because somebody says they're doing something for good reasons doesn't necessarily mean they're doing things for good reasons. Even when people are doing things for the best of reasons, they may have certain biases that push them in particular directions that are not necessarily in the best interest of the thing that they are actually saying that they're doing. Let alone in our experiences, when people are doing things in this way, usually good reasons are not necessarily the way it turns out. Can you think of an intrusion where we've done something? For example, when radicalizing Islam to be used against the Russians, with the side effect of the Mujahideen, or the Taliban, for that matter. You could even go down to, what's the most recent one that Obama did, where he, well, you get my point. Ultimately, we invest ourselves into these things, and then you're stuck with the consequences. Bush, saying we need to get rid of a dictator. Saddam Hussein is a bad guy, so we got to get rid of Bush. Obama with Syria, putting weapons and resources, essentially keeping that war bubbling over and over and over and over again, having all of these people getting killed in a meat grinder, as opposed to allowing the basic natural forces that's in a particular nation to take hold of that nation. Meaning, let those people choose for themselves without us interfering in the conflict and us getting stuck with the holding the bag for that stuff. We're still in Iraq today. Now, whether you think Bush's intentions were good or bad, some people actually believe that his intentions were good. Either way, they try to justify the getting rid of Saddam with the murder of 1 million people. Just because people say they have good intentions doesn't necessarily mean it turns out that way. Not to mention, small changes have massive consequences. It makes more sense to just not be a part of it. Let's take a listen to
of the other planet.
Steve.
Captain Picard decides that he cannot intervene to correct this obviously exploitative relationship because to do so would violate the Prime Directive. At the end of the episode, as Picard is preparing to leave the solar system, he and Dr. Crusher have a scene in the turbo lift that goes something like this. Seems like we should have done something to help that planet full of suffering drug addicts we just left. Nope, you're wrong, and I'll tell you why. Halt turbo lift. Oh, here we go. The Prime Directive is more than a rule we're supposed to follow. It's a philosophy, and a good one. History shows that whenever an advanced civilization interferes with a less advanced civilization, no matter how good their intentions are, it always goes horribly wrong and ruins everything. What about the Vulcans guiding the development of Earth following first contact? That's not canon yet. Look, the Prime Directive is there for a reason. Did I mention what history shows us? Because I can go over it again. Dude, I'm a doctor and a commander in Starfleet. I know about the Prime Directive. Why are you lecturing me like I've only just heard of it? I just think it sucks that we're leaving all those people to deal with the pain of their addiction and withdrawal. Yeah, well, we're leaving now and we're never coming back, so it's whatever. Resume turbo lift. Oh, tell me you did not just resume turbo lift your way out of a conversation with me. I think Picard is actually less condescending in my version. He was a prick in the first season. His odd decision to respond to Dr. Crusher's compassion for suffering people with a grandstanding little speech notwithstanding, Picard in that scene actually gives a pretty good summary of what the Prime Directive is and why it's important. Unfortunately, the producers of Star Trek aren't always so clear and consistent when it comes to their depiction of Starfleet's General Order No. 1.
Now, this is not totally fair. At least I don't think I totally agree with this part. Because I try to think of Star Trek as a living, breathing show. Like if these characters were real characters. And they were... And I understand it's the image of a person, or the show is written in the image of the person. It's like the best version of it. Let's say if you were in the military, you have this really high idea of what the military is. And if you pen a book about the military, you're going to write about these people in glowing terms. So fair enough. But ultimately, people are different. Like, so the interpretations are going to be different. Meaning, the way Picard may interpret something is going to be different than Sisko may interpret something. And being people, they're going to try to go to the letter of the law. Meaning, they may try to fracture it in spirit while necessarily ducking it in practice. Let's let him make his point, though. Because I don't think he's fully wrong, but I know what he's getting at.
That's why, despite how reasonable Picard makes it sound, I sometimes find myself questioning whether the Prime Directive is such a great thing after all. It's a
blasphemy.
I'll explore a bit further in this video, which I'm calling Why the Prime Directive Might Actually Be a Terrible Rule. The concept of the Prime Directive was introduced in the classic Star Trek episode The Return of the Archons, where, in a sign of things to come, Captain Kirk violates it a few minutes after Spock mentions it for the first time. But Kirk had a good reason for violating the Prime Directive. Or at least he thought he did. And that's really the only reason the Prime Directive is there, to force the captain to make a choice, to follow the rule, or to do what he knows in his heart is right. But it's not automatically a bad rule just because the captains have broken it a lot. In fact, as originally conceived, it's a pretty good rule. At least in theory. In Return of the Archons, Spock makes reference to the Prime Directive of non-interference, and usually when a Star Trek character cites the Prime Directive, that's what they're talking about. The general order that forbids Starfleet personnel from interfering in the internal affairs of other civilizations. That's a good rule, for the reasons Picard cites in Symbiosis. Meddling in the internal affairs of another society, no matter how well-intentioned, almost always produces disastrous results. And this was more than an intellectual abstraction. Remember that the original Star Trek was produced during some of the bloodiest years of the Vietnam War, a period when more and more Americans were beginning to feel strongly that it was not the place of their country to try and dictate the affairs of other countries.
I find that line to be funny, not because he's saying it, but because it's true. Like, but why would your country believe it was its place to tell other countries what they should be doing anyway? I struggled with this one. And let me explain what I mean when I struggle with it. Because when I formulate an argument of trying to think of, well, what is a well-intentioned thing? Meaning somebody went in with the best of intentions and it turned it turned out well. But I can't think of something where people went in with the best of intentions, if that makes sense. Most of the things are for political gain or monetary gain or some kind of gain out of it. It's not something where people are doing it for the highest of their ideals. Even going to space. Hell, the space race was more about trying to get some kind of dominance in space over the Soviets. So even something to that degree had some other ends that they were trying to accomplish. Even the Vietnam War. All of this stuff had to do with this kind of jockeying for domination from the standpoint of a global system. This kind of economic system versus political system. So I struggled to figure out what's a situation where it was done for the best of ideals. And I don't necessarily know, which means that to some degree this conversation is somewhat of an abstraction. We would have to assume that whatever is taking place, the person is doing it for the best of intentions. But even in that situation, you can kind of see this going wrong. A kid is playing with another kid. A kid pulls out what you consider to be a weapon. You pull out your weapon and you shoot that kid in the back. You find out that that kid wasn't having a weapon at all. It was just a toy gun. Should you have intervened? Should you have figured out more of what was taking place? Did you care about the ramifications of the actions? As you were going through, you felt in your heart that the action was right. Take this to Enterprise, the Archer. When Archer was in the ship, and Archer would be curious and instigate his ship into battles that he could in no way win. Earth had like 2 ships. That's it. 2 ships. The ship could only go, if I'm not mistaken, up to like warp 5, and it barely get to warp 5 before it looked like it was going to fall apart. And if I remember correctly, on episode 2 or episode 3, Archer had got into a fight with another alien species. Should he have gotten involved? The answer is no. But he, in his heart, felt that it was right to do so. Do you realize the Earth could have been obliterated if that particular race, if that particular species was strong enough to go back and follow where that ship came from? There are larger consequences to this idea of the captain feels it in his heart. And because he feels it in his heart, he just does it. There's a reason for the non-interference rule. Part of that reason is, yes, to save your own hide. But also because you can't necessarily always conceive of the global ramifications or the galactic ramifications of the actions that you're taking. Let's keep going. My main argument here has to do more so with these are galactic civilizations. You, from the standpoint of your ship, cannot always conceive about what's going to take place on a galactic level based on the actions that you take. Even actions that you may deem to be appropriate, even actions that you may feel to be absolutely, completely, 1,000% correct, may be wrong, may be utterly and completely wrong. The Prime Directive is there for a reason. It's there for a reason. Let's keep going. Let's let him fulfill his argument. I want to make his case.
The original Star Trek referenced Vietnam multiple times during its run. It's reasonable to assume there were at least a few writers on that show who wished the United States had its own Prime Directive and followed it. Unfortunately, the more we learn about Starfleet and how it operates, the more complicated and ethically dubious its commitment to the Prime Directive starts to seem. These complications really start to pile up in the Next Generation era, but they have their beginnings in classic Trek. At some point, one of the writers or producers must have noticed that pledging to uphold a non-interference principle is kind of an odd thing for people to do when their primary mission is to seek out new life and new civilizations, and you know the rest. So the meaning and application of the Prime Directive was tweaked a little to allow the crew of the Enterprise to do the thing that was the entire basis for their show. In the second season episode Bread and Circuses, Kirk and McCoy summarize the Prime Directive as demanding no identification of self or mission, no interference with the social development of said planet, no references to space or the fact that there are other worlds or more advanced civilizations. There you go. Visits are okay. Just try not to let them see you. Don't tell them who you are if they do see you. Don't mess with their society, and keep your trap shut about outer space and aliens.
Now, that's fair. Personally, I think that's fair. I mean, ultimately, you're getting up to the letter of what's being said, which sounds like a person to me. It's like, how do people file their taxes? How do people, the speed limit is 65 miles per hour. The person goes 65 miles per hour. People tend to go to the limit. Well, they're trying to go to the limit of the Prime Directive while at the same token fulfilling their other obligations of boldly going where no man has gone before. And in this case, scientific research and advancement. I don't necessarily think that's crazy. If you don't see me and if you don't know that I'm there, nothing has taken place with the same point of view of your society. Let's keep going.
And stuff. How hard is that? Well, like I said, the complications kept piling up. In Star Trek The Next Generation, the observe but don't be observed interpretation of the Prime Directive was cited as justification for the Federation's use of holographically concealed duck blinds to do anthropological research on pre-warp civilizations. Every time we see one of these duck blinds, something goes horribly wrong, but that's not really the point. After all, Star Trek is an action-adventure show where something going horribly wrong is the catalyst for the plot of almost all of the episodes. If something didn't go horribly wrong at some point, it probably wouldn't be a very exciting hour of television. The crew of the Enterprise visits a remote outpost where scientists are secretly observing a primitive society, and everything goes pretty much as planned. Don't miss the next exciting episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. The point is, studying less advanced civilizations in secret so as to avoid influencing the development of their society seems scientifically sound. The civilization being studied is allowed to develop without outside interference, and researchers are able to learn more about how societies grow and evolve. It's win-win. But is it ethically sound? The ethical issues don't become apparent as long as the society being studied isn't in any danger. But what if a natural disaster threatens?
Now, calling it, is it ethically sound from the standpoint of a galactic civilization is a little dicey. What does ethics mean in this standpoint? I mean, ethics is not, I guess you can say, is it ethics, I guess from a human standpoint, is it humanly ethical? But I guess it doesn't apply. And let me make this, I don't want to step on his argument. Let him make his argument first.
To destroy it.
Because I think this is his strongest argument.
Can mitigate or even prevent entirely. Does following the Prime Directive mean allowing a society in such a predicament to suffer the disaster and possibly be destroyed? Apparently it does. In the TNG episode Homeward, Captain Picard allows the Baralan civilization to die when its planet's atmosphere goes bye-bye. A small group of Baralans are saved thanks to Worf's brother Nikolai Rozhenko, but Nikolai acts in defiance of Captain Picard's orders and is clearly presented as having violated the Prime Directive. Pretty much everyone else on the ship is super annoyed at Nikolai, even Worf, who's like, I can't believe you broke the Prime Directive and neglected your duties as a scientist. And Nikolai is like, oh, the universal translator must be malfunctioning because that's a really strange way of telling me I'm a hero for saving all those lives. And the thing is, by the end of that episode, Worf has come around to his brother's side of things. He's still a stickler for the rules, but he comes to recognize that Nikolai did the right thing by violating the Prime Directive to rescue some of the Baralans.
Did he do the right thing? I mean, the right thing is not an absolute. The right thing is in comparison to something else sometimes. There's no such thing as right or wrong in this case. Now, you could say he did the right thing if the goal was to save life. But the goal of Starfleet is not necessarily to save life, if that makes sense. Nikolai got attached to the group that he was studying. Nikolai was not necessarily in the best of situations to make a determination on what to do in this case. My only point to this is there's a difference between a galactic perspective of things versus the perspective of a one-on-one human interaction. From the standpoint of a galactic point of view, yeah, it sounds bad. They take an L. And it was an entire planet. He even makes reference to it was an entire planet. It was completely impractical for them to be able to transport an entire planet out. And the group of people who did come out was essentially Nikolai's group. Look, my issue with this is you have no idea the ramifications of captains making decisions on this scale from the standpoint of galactic events. Think Janeway for the moment. I'm going to invoke Janeway. Because I understand this point. It's like, well, look, is it possible? If it's possible to prevent something, can we at least save people if it's possible to prevent something? Prime Directive will say, no. Now, is it possible to get a reprieve on the Prime Directive? That's a different question. But I am really dicey about having captains making decisions that could essentially get us or planets wiped out. Do you remember Janeway in Voyager? In one of the episodes, she was trying to get her ship back and made a deal with the Borg in order to fight fluidic space. It was a being in fluidic space. Janeway assisted the Borg in beating the being from fluidic space. Now, in doing this, one of the repercussions for this was that the Borg was able to redouble its efforts in certain galaxies, which allowed it to completely destroy and wipe out. I can't think of the name of the group. The group came back for vengeance, or one of the guys from the race came back for vengeance. But I'm trying to make the point. The things that captains do can have massive repercussions on galactic scales. We're off the scales of planets. Meaning, like, I do something in a particular country, and it has some reverberation. No, we're talking about galactic scales. I don't know if we want captains blowing off the Prime Directive in this way when they just feel like it. Let's keep going. I mean, I understand this point, and yes, I'm being a hard ass, but I still make the point that I don't necessarily know if individuals at the board of a ship, at the head of a ship, is purely in a situation where they can feel like something and have that feel like something make some decision that could have massive reverberations throughout the galactic space. I'm a little dicey on that point. Let's keep going.
And that's not just Worf being led by his heart rather than his head. There's something terribly cold-blooded about choosing to involve yourself with a society, even if it's just as an unseen observer, and then standing by and doing nothing while that society is wiped out of existence. Of course, the Barallans aren't really the best example to use here because their entire planet was rendered uninhabitable by a natural disaster which apparently even the advanced technology of the Federation was powerless to prevent, and it just wasn't logistically feasible to relocate the entire planetary population somewhere else. And the few Barallans who did survive only survived because they happened to be in the group that Nikolai became involved with. All the other Barallans on the planet still died. That doesn't seem fair. A better example is what Captain Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise do in the opening sequence of Star Trek Into Darkness. They intervene to prevent a volcano from erupting and destroying a pre-warp civilization living on the planet Nibiru. Eventually, Kirk is forced to reveal their presence to the indigenous people in order to rescue Spock, but the plan going in was to kill the volcano in secret and leave without the Nibirans ever knowing they'd been there. However, when the Enterprise returns to Earth, Admiral Pike scolds Spock for trying to get around the Prime Directive on a technicality. Apparently, even if the mission had gone according to plan, stopping the volcano from killing the Nibirans would have violated the intended spirit, if not the exact letter, of the Prime Directive.
Understand what you're saying, though. I mean, Look, I understand in the specific cases that they seem cold-blooded. Like, if you took a microscope and you drill down to one specific case of saying, oh, dude, that's kind of cold-blooded that they were going to allow that group to die. How many ships are there out in space? And how many of these ships are interacting with all sorts of race and all sorts of cultures and beings and everything else? For every one of these situations where one of these people may, let's say, die, how much trauma would be created from the standpoint of a captain also doing the same thing and fucking up royally? Like, the Prime Directive is there to some degree to try to head that off. Like, the stakes to which you're dealing with are magnificent. Think of Discovery. And I don't necessarily like use Discovery because it's kind of the, you know, the gimpy brother. But if you remember, her shooting on the Cleon started a war. The very act of the Federation trying to assimilate planets, and assimilate is a bad term for it, but essentially Cleons are like, you guys are trying to put your culture on us in a sense of erode our culture. We're angry at that, meaning the very presence was essentially becoming irritant. Think of like a refugee crisis where the society is essentially rebel because of refugees and push back. Hey, I know one. Think of Obama and many of these guys pushing this kind of neoliberalism from the standpoint of politics and economics. And in a way to try to head off China, try to put trade pacts. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TTIP, TISA, some of these other ones. With the nation state pushing back on what they're doing. Meaning for all of the scheming and all of the trading and all of the negotiating, everything else, the United States eventually puts a person in office who says no to it. And not just no to it, emphatically no to it. With the person on the Democratic Party side and Trump side saying the exact same thing. That was a pushback based on something that was taking place within the society itself. Those things have consequences. They have magnificent consequences. Let's let him finish. I guess my major point is, on a galactic scale, it is dramatically dangerous to have captains doing this, you know, feeling it their way through when they should follow the Prime Directive and when they should just blow the Prime Directive off. And I know some of these cases can be kind of gross, but I would wager that the cases that are kind of gross are much less than the cases that may be traumatic and that may cause either war or cause destruction to other planets based on captains just kind of winging it in what they believe is right. Let's keep going. I hope that makes sense.
But wouldn't allowing an entire civilization to die a preventable death violate the spirit of the Prime Directive too? The rule was established to discourage Starfleet from contaminating less advanced cultures, but isn't utter destruction worse than contamination? Hey, don't make that face at me, Pike. I'm just asking questions. And let's not forget, the no identification of self or mission portion of the Prime Directive doesn't apply to all non-Federation societies, just to the ones that haven't yet developed warp drive. Which, on one hand, makes sense. After all, once a species learns to travel through space faster than light, it doesn't really make sense for all the other warp-capable species to hide from them. But on the other hand, the development of warp drive seems like an arbitrary line to draw. Dude, seriously, calm down. Stressing out like that'll put you in an early grave.
Well, I don't think it's arbitrary. I mean, it's like the sound barrier, the light barrier. If you can travel through light or travel at warp, I would imagine at that point you've reached the point to reach other planets, other stars, other beings. There's something wrong with my argument in the last part. The argument doesn't work. And the reason why that argument doesn't work from the standpoint of a galactic scale is because you're not dealing with other civilizations from the standpoint of space. You're dealing with them from the standpoint of planets, meaning you only interact with individual planets. Well, maybe it does work. It still does work, because ultimately you're probably going to end up in situations where you may contaminate planets more than you end up helping those planets. So yeah, I'm standing by the argument. Fucking A. Let's keep going. Let's let him finish.
As we know from Star Trek First Contact, the Vulcans revealed themselves to the people of Earth like a few minutes after Earth's first ever warp speed flight. And as we know from Enterprise, which begins about 100 years after First Contact, the Vulcans took a very active role in guiding the development of Earth. And despite some understandable and possibly justified resentment on the part of some humans, it seems like that worked out pretty well for Earth. I should also mention that the Prime Directive doesn't stop the Federation government from meddling in the internal affairs of planets that fall under its jurisdiction. Remember the conflict with the Maquis? That rebellion of colonists along the border between Federation and Cardassian space that began because the Federation gave their planets away to the Cardassians? Let's just review a little bit of what you're signing up for when you enlist in Starfleet. You have to let all these people die when a volcano fries their planet because, hey, it's wrong to interfere in the internal affairs of other societies. But if the Federation Council decides it's a good idea, you also have to kick these people off their land. Do either of those things seem right? The legal and moral complexities that govern when to intervene in the affairs of another society and when to sit back and watch them all go extinct are touched on in several Star Trek episodes, but are never really explored in depth. And that's
my only problem with that argument. It's the people who are part of the Federation at that point are part of the Federation. It's not like you're not contaminating them. They're part of the government. It would be like the United States government making some kind of proclamation for Texas, as opposed to the United States government going into the wilderness and finding somebody who's never seen a airplane before. Like, there's a difference in those things. That's why I'm not quite sure that one works. As for letting those people die, I get it. That's cold-blooded. I do get it. My heart goes out to them. My heart absolutely goes out to him. And if I was in a situation, I may actually make the same choice as the captain to help him out. So I don't want you to think I'm an asshole. That being said, that rule is there because more often than not, it's probably going to be a situation where it's contamination, not so much where you're helping. I guess, like, do you help them if it's, let's say it's not a natural disaster. Let's say it's a war. Or let's say there's a group that's going to kill a large group of them and you're sitting from space and you can see them. That's about to take place. Do you use your phasers in order to help them in that situation? Like, where does that line, the end, the begin, that gets a murky area. Part of the whole reason for non-interference is you don't want these people involved in these decisions. You want the captain out of it. Yes, it looks bad sometimes. It looks bad sometimes. And no, I can't necessarily justify it on the sense of these kind of basic, if I want as many people to survive as possible. No, I can't justify it on that basis. I justify it on the basis of non-interference. You set your ethics. If your ethics are based around this idea of we're not going to interfere with pre-warped civilizations under no circumstances, then those are your ethical guidelines. Your ethical guidelines are not something that are just magic or something you're born with. Those are things that you and your society come up with. Meaning, from their standpoint, at that particular point in their societal state, what they consider to be rational human beings, yeah, that group takes an L. That group takes an L. I know it sounds like I'm an asshole. I don't mean to be an asshole. I'm just saying. And by the way, I to some degree agree with the argument. If I am in the specific moment, yeah, I may make a different decision than somebody else who's somewhat distinct from it, saying, what the hell are you doing? You're not supposed to interfere. Because you must understand that people from farther away from that is looking at these things from a wider context. So let's let him finish. I don't dislike his argument. I think his argument works. My only disagreement here is the perspective of the individual planet versus your organization and how that organization is going to work as a guiding principle versus people just feeling what's right. I don't want them to just feel what's right.
That's because the Prime Directive wasn't invented in order to allow the writers of Star Trek to interrogate the values of the Federation. It was invented in order to give the heroes a rule they had to decide either to follow or to break. Like many elements of the franchise, the Prime Directive started out as something relatively simple and grew into something almost incomprehensibly complicated due to the fact that people have been making Star Trek for over 50 years, and every writer has their own ideas about how tropes like the Prime Directive ought to be used in order to craft the best possible story. That's why in some episodes, the Prime Directive is a rule that prevents the heroes from doing the right thing, which should obviously be broken, and in other
right there, the concept of the right thing, I challenge that. I disagree that I don't just accept that quote unquote is the right thing. It depends on what it is. And again, the right thing is relative. It depends on what your societal values and everything else are. Let's keep going.
Other episodes, it's a rule that reminds them that sometimes doing their duty as Starfleet officers means not being able to do what they think is the right thing. And sometimes it means letting millions of people die from a disease you have the cure for because, hey, we're not out here to play God. Isn't that right, Jonathan? I know, technically the Prime Directive doesn't exist yet when that story takes place. Maybe Dear Doctor isn't so much the origin story for the Prime Directive, but the explanation for why the Prime Directive is so weird and inconsistent. Hey, yeah, that must be it. I guess it all boils down to this. Why might the Prime Directive actually be a terrible rule? Because it's vague, and it's contradictory, and it invites conflicting interpretations. The don't interfere in the internal affairs of another society bit is good. The stand by and allow an entire civilization to perish from something you could prevent, even if you've been secretly observing that civilization for years bit, not so much. This concludes my presentation.
I love his channel, by the way. I love his channel. His channel trips me out. I understand the argument of, wanting to interfere. I get it. My problem with that is, from my context, I don't know any political situation in which people interfere in something where they're not trying to get something out of it. Even when they're saying there's no bias, there's usually some level of bias in the way the person is going about their way. And I mean bias in the sense of saying one thing and doing something else for other reasons. So I have to take a logical leap of saying that the person is doing it purely for the right interest. That's the first point. For the second point, I think it will bite you in the ass big time if that's allowed. That's all. I think part of that reason and the rigidity of that rule is because you are interacting with all sorts of races and civilizations. one of the civilizations that you put on another planet could come back, develop a civilization that's extraordinarily robust, angry at you because you put them on some hostile planet and you ended up being their devil figure, in which case they came back in order to obliterate Earth. Even if it takes place in 1,000 years, the actions that you took in order to save that race ended up being the thing that destroyed Earth. I'm saying you're working at a level where you cannot necessarily predict the way that these planets are going to unravel. Yes, you save them at a certain point. You have no idea how that's going to be interpreted in 100, 200, 1,000 years. No idea. Yes, I'll be the bad guy arguing that one of these planets may have to take an L as opposed to exposing yourself to those planets. What happens if Donald Trump comes out tomorrow and Donald Trump says, hey, they're aliens. They're coming through a portal near Jupiter. They're aliens. We've shot down a ship. We know what they look like. They have amazing technology. Vote Trump. What would take place, honestly, on the ground? What would take place? What would society do? What would society say? What would how would they react? How would they behave? My wife was like, people flip out. I'm trying to make the point that small things have magnificent ripples and consequences. Part of the rigidity of that particular rule is to prevent captains from doing things that would have adverse effects throughout the galaxy, whether it's in short term or long term, especially if they may create adverse conditions for us in our interests. So that's the best pitch I can think of against the whole moralistic argument of, oh my God, they're going to let these people die. I know I sound like an asshole in a moment. And by the way, the interpretation of the Prime Directive is going to be different for the captain. Like, Janeway interprets it a particular way because Janeway needs to get her people home, and Janeway is a human being, and she's more flexible about it because she wants to get her people home. Picard can be a little bit more rigid in the way he goes about dealing with it because he has a whole federation behind him. He's relatively safe. Cisco is on front lines of a war zone, so for his standpoint, yeah, he's a little bit more flexible in the way he goes about it also. But I don't think Cisco was involved in too much exploration. He was more military. But you get my point. And Archer standing by and letting those aliens die, I don't know how I feel about that one. But you get my point. That's the best I could do. Joshua Rishaw, the Prime Directive was developed as a propaganda to the U.S. society. Knowing it would result in viewers coming to the conclusion that intervention is ethical, which will be used to justify Vietnam and Iraq. What? That doesn't make sense. It's non-intervention. I mean, the whole idea of the Prime Directive was non-intervention. We would not intervene in the affairs of other societies. So if, one society we come across a society as pre-warp, we don't intervene. We may observe, we may inject ourselves where we can kind of look around, providing nothing takes place where, they can know it's us. But we don't intervene. I don't necessarily know how that would be propaganda for the standpoint of something that's beneficial to the United States. It seems like it would be the opposite. I could be wrong, Joshua, but Star Trek was socialist, yes. Anarchist socialist. Or at the very least it got to the point where it became socialist libertarian or libertarian socialist, whatever it's called. Or Dopariah. As soon as you bring other writers into it, etc., it messes with the messaging and the lore a lot. But very interesting nonetheless. No, it is. I mean, it gets you into these weird ethical dilemmas with the idea of the Prime Directive, like you said. But it's only an ethical dilemma because it's, oh my God, do I save these people or not? The Prime Directive is clear. There's no issue with the Prime Directive. It's not vague. The issue is the person who's dealing with the Prime Directive and how they feel about it. Their feelings is the thing that makes it vague, if that makes sense. It's don't interfere. It's like, oh God, these people might die. Don't interfere. interfere. Oh, but these people might die. They might die. They might die. The person might die. Don't interfere. It's not the don't interfere that's the issue. It's the those people may die is the problem. It's the feeling associated with it. It's not the Prime Directive. Prime Directive is very clear. The needs of the donors outweigh the needs of the many. Hillary Cleon. Balthazar. That's hilarious. All their needs were met in Star Trek. I don't think that socialism, I don't think they had an economic system. No, they did have an economic system. At one point, they still had cash at one point. They made the transition from cash to something else. But, yeah, their needs were met. I mean, they had replicators and all this other stuff. They were free human beings. Freedom. Amazing fucking concept. Think about that shit. Like, ultimately, you have somewhere to stay. You never go hungry. You're free. Enjoy your life. Now, what do people do at that point? Those people were probably going to go into some pursuit in which they work for the rest of their life, doing something they love. And they may switch to something else midway through life when they get sick of doing the other thing and do something else that they love. They're free human beings. I don't understand why that's not what we work for or work towards. I honestly don't. Data lore, data litera. Yeah, I think the absolute interpretation of the Prime Directive is kind of mindless and fascist. What? Joshua Renshaw, the most effective propaganda is to allow people to come to their own conclusion, which is the one you wanted to force them to come to in the first place. Fair enough, Josh, but how is it mindless and fascist? How's it fascist? So if I'm in the United States and I say I don't want to be involved in these military conflicts around the world, not just I don't want to be involved in these conflicts. What I mean when I say that is I want to stop giving money, billions of dollars to Israel to murder and kill Palestinians. I want to stop giving money to these terroristic regimes around the world like Saudi Arabia or support to Saudi Arabia. I want to stop giving money or support. Well, at this point, Iraq has been destroyed. But we're in like 70% of the globe military-wise. I want to stop that. I don't want to do that. That's unproductive to me. That's overly expensive. That's using money in ways that I don't necessarily deem appropriate. I want to use that money for people to live. I don't see the point in a life if the people can't live their life. And if your society is not necessarily organizing in a way that allow people to live a decent life, then what's the point? What's the point? They didn't use cash. Yeah, at one point they stopped. Khalida, at some point they stopped. Yeah, Kate, no, I'm agreeing with you. But at one point they did have cash. I mean, they stopped using it. At least based on Star Trek lore. He was going through the timeline in which of Star Trek and how they kind of eventually shed money and all this other stuff. It's the subprime directive. That's hilarious, Danny. That's hilarious, Daddy. Anything that asks people to surrender their abilities to act in a way that they feel is moral is fascist. Follow orders, look the other way. We will tell you what to do. You know what? That's the interesting part, right? Ultimately, it's is it fascist if people already are on the same page? Like, for example, why don't whites call people N-words anymore? At least openly. Like, why don't they do that? Why don't it's like, hey, thanks, nigga John. You doing okay today? Like, why doesn't that take place more ordinarily on a daily basis in America? It used to take place that way in the 60s. Why not now? Is it because there are fascist policies in America that's preventing whites from being able to call African Americans, N-words? Is that what it is? Is America fascist in this way that's preventing their language? I'm trying to make the point that is it fascist if people are already on the same page, where there's a tick up in the consciousness of the population itself, where if you look around, everything looks perfectly okay. It's like being in water that's equal to your body temperature. Doesn't feel like I'm in water because it's equal to my body temperature. I'm making the point that it's not necessarily fascist if everybody just already agree. So if you have a raise in consciousness where you say, it makes perfect sense to us to make sure that people have the things that they need to exist. We couldn't think otherwise. It would be unconscionable otherwise. We can't even fathom a society that would do such a thing. Think of ancient Rome. Why don't we have slaves today? Why don't we allow people to buy other human beings from the standpoint of using them as slaves? We used to do it in ancient Rome. Why not now? We used to do it in America. Why not now? I'm saying the fascist thing. You could say that there's been a fascistic assault on the rights of whites to be able to hold other people as slaves and talk bad about them. I'm trying to make the point to you that it's not necessarily a fascistic thing if the people just kind of agree in the society that things have changed and this is the level to which we will exist. I hope that makes sense. One of the few things that I liked about the episode Justice is when Picard basically said, fuck the Prime Directive, I'm not letting them execute Wesley. Yeah, even the Edo God understood. Jamal, come on. No, look, I feel you. I don't like Wesley, so fair enough. But I agreed with Picard on that. I did agree with Picard on it. You're making me a hypocrite, man. You're making me a hypocrite. You're making me a hypocrite, dog. You're making me a hypocrite. People are flawed and can be submissive and authoritarianism. That's a fact. Okay. Look, like I said, in the immediate, in the specific moment, I get it. I get it. What if that Edo God, however, turned around and not just destroyed the ship, went and obliterated Earth? What if that Edo God obliterated Earth? Wasn't anything Picard could do to stop it. Wasn't anything any of the other ships could do to stop it. That thing would have put a path of destruction that could have destroyed each and everything in its path. It could have obliterated the human race. What if saving Wesley set off a series of events that ended the destruction of the human race? I'm just saying. Tell me I'm wrong. You know I'm right. You know I'm right. They were utterly powerless to do anything to stop that thing if that thing would have went on a tear, killing us and all these people. So, I feel you. Yeah, but the destruction of the people on the planet. Yes, that could have happened. Picard understood the risk. He made the ethical decision based on everything he thought Starfleet stood for, and he was right. It was ethical based on human values. You understand that, right? Like, ethics are not absolute. There are no such thing as absolute ethics. He made a choice based on human values on a planet that wasn't Earth, dealing with people that weren't human, dealing with a being that wasn't even in this dimensional space. You're talking about human values. Come on, are you shitting me? That thing could have killed everything. Picard wasn't necessarily right, nor was Picard necessarily wrong. It was neither. Ultimately, Picard made a choice. Right and wrong doesn't exist. It's cause and effect. At that point, that could have been an effect that wiped out Earth. This is the point I'm trying to get across to you. Ethics, in this case, don't exist. If he would have done that, people would have blamed Picard. Ethical individualism versus ethical collectivism. Ethical collectivism, I think, is more important. Like when, people make this argument that if I look out for my best interest, then I am going to do the best thing for my society. That's nonsense. It depends on what you mean by your best interest. Your best interest, depending on what your class is, would be clumping with other people of your class. And this kind of collective self-interest. It's like the placebo effect. Someone you trust most times an authority figure tells you this drug will help you, you believe it, and sometimes it actually works. Humans are weird and very different. Luca Clemente, there is such a thing as absolute ethics, but such a system is arbitrary. That it's not absolute. It's not absolute. It would always be dependent on the perspective of the person, or the race, or the culture, or the whatever. The freak out of every living thing until you've got delight. EMF the freak out of everything. So if Picard let them execute Wesley, that could have been right. No, not buying it. Wait a minute, I didn't say that. I'm not going to condone execution of a child just because another society thinks it makes sense. All right. Well, you condone the execution of the entirety of the human race. Just know that there's a possibility. You believing, and this is kind of exactly precisely my point, the captain believing that they're right, and then believing that they're right based on their own human conception, doing something that may get the entire human race wiped out. It's not that I disagree with you per se, but goddamn it, there are magnificent consequences for the things that are taking place. Picard could have gotten all these people killed. Now, I agree with you. I don't think you could leave Wesley to be killed. But look, this is what makes Star Trek awesome. I mean, that question right there by itself. What is that thing going to do if we take Wesley? We can't do anything to stop it. We can't fight it. We can't. They see it as a god. We can't even get information on what it is because the moment that the person sees it, the thing flips out. What do? That's a magnificent fucking show. That was one of the best shows on Star Trek. So, I feel you. But again, it is ethical to take that kid, and it's ethical to not take that kid. It depends on the ethics to what you're talking about. This is kind of what I'm getting at. It's relative. It's relative. You need a Prime Directive for one stake solution. Where's the line, Jamal? When do you shake off the fear of consequence? If they show up and say they kill half of humans, and if you resist, they kill them all. No, can't resist. What do you mean? Who are you talking about? I was arguing against just laying there and taking it. You're talking about Wesley. Wesley is on another planet. Wesley broke the rules on that particular planet. And in breaking the rules on that planet, the Federation has a rule. And it's not even a Prime Directive at that point. That's just a whole nother rule. But another rule of letting the legal system play out. And in letting the legal system play out, the legal system was death. The legal system was death. So, just saying, man. I'm not saying I want anything to happen to Wesley, but I'm saying there are consequences or potential consequences that need to be paid attention to. Bogus belittling fostered by fear with death porn. What? I have no idea what that means. Making arguments based on human values that exist in the future is moot. C card. It is not C card. We're going to do that shit. We have no capacity to know what it's going to be, but goddamn it, we're going to do it. If we're looking at anything, we can look at the arc of history, and it seems to move towards the left. Animal rights, maybe. Human rights. Maybe we break off the shackles of this kind of capitalistic system in the same way they broke off the shackles of monarchs. Hey, we don't need kings and queens, and they're not appointed by God. Did you say they weren't appointed by God? Yes, we did. Woohoo! I didn't know it. Hey, did you know that you can run companies without CEOs and without all of these boards in the top 1%? You can get rid of them and actually have worker-owned corporations or worker-owned companies. I didn't know that. Woohoo! Will Whedon's an establishment Democrat shill should have let him die. I don't like Wesley Crusher either, man, so I feel you. Why does it matter how the threat happened when you're arguing that there are big consequences and we have to avoid it, so letting a society die, even because elsewhere it might end out bad? No, that's not what I'm arguing. I'm arguing that you're sending multiple captains thousands of ships all out into space. Those ships have a mission of interacting with other societies. And in interacting with those societies, you have no idea what those captains are going to end up doing if you don't have somewhat of a rule that says, don't interrupt, don't interact. Every so often, yeah, you may get into one of those situations where something bad may happen. I agree. I don't like it either. But the argument is sound. I mean, looking at it from a galactic disposition and saying, we shouldn't interrupt, we shouldn't interfere. It's not our business to interfere into the behavior of the planets. I agree with you, though, that it is somewhat cold-blooded. I do agree. What if we find out that plants feel pain and suffering more than animals and thus become more delicious? What about in the future we find it's unethical to kill chickens, but only chickens? Hey, you know what's probably going to happen? They're going to probably start making meat substitutes in the future. So you don't have to kill chickens anymore. So essentially, they don't necessarily going to have the animal agriculture in the way they have it now. They're just going to grow chickens in labs. So they're going to have all these labs where they're growing chickens and meat, fat, and all this other stuff without the animal itself. It's just going to be the meat grown like a leaf or like a tree or something. That sounds fucking gross to me. But I suspect that that's what they're going to do. Just flying around in the first place is putting yourself at risk. There's way bigger interaction with other races that have starships. Yeah, agreed. And chatting with space cavemen. Agreed. Space Lorca, Captain Lorca, doesn't seem to follow. Oh, God. Yeah. Lorca. Well, the thing is, Lorca wasn't even a part of this universe. Lorca was part of the other universe. He was part of the mirror universe. He was a badass, though. I mean, he was fucking beast. But yeah, the rules, not so much. Not so much. But what if we find out that growing chickens in a lab is more unethical than killing them? How? I mean, like, assume for the moment that growing them, and when I say grow, I just mean the fat or the meat itself, like growing protein. Like you're not growing like a real chicken. It's chicken meat, but only the chicken meat. It sounds so gross when you say it, right? It sounds so nasty. But they're trying to develop stuff that tastes like chicken, so you don't have to like harvest chickens. It's so nasty, so gross. What's your ranking of the series? I have a special love for the original series, but I gotta be honest, I think Picard is probably my favorite show. That said, Deep Space Nine becomes the best show when it gets to the war years. When it gets to the last 3 years of Deep Space Nine is the best. Discovery started to grow on me, but that's at the tail end of my list. Yeah, I don't like rating them because it's like rating your kids, but I have a hard time. Deep Space Nine was my favorite. Yeah, Luca, Deep Space Nine was good. It really was. I didn't like the first few seasons, like the first 3 seasons ish, and then, but the thing I loved about it, it slowly built up a conflict in that quadrant, and it did it in this way that wasn't just kind of like, you know, she attacks her captain within the first few minutes of the show and then shoots a Klingon or something to that effect. No, it was built up slowly over the course of multiple seasons, where you could see this threat growing. You could see how Earth was complacent. You could see how Cisco was somewhat freaking out about the threat. Yeah, Deep Space Nine was really, really good. Even the moral quandaries associated with that, this thing of blowing up a ship and all this other stuff. I'm taking this argument of the Prime Directive thing because I do think the Prime Directive is sound. I think it's something that you need to use. I think it may be modifications to it. Don't get me wrong. I don't see it as an absolute. Maybe that's the difference here. But I do think it's something that should be followed. There should be consequences when a captain breaks the Prime Directive. But maybe a clause in it where you can try to get feedback on whether or not you can break it for asylum seekers. Yeah, asylum seekers. The little girl who asked for asylum, she was given asylum. She was an asylum seeker. You got to know they're there first before you ask. Just saying. I'm standing up for the Prime Directive, goddammit. Season 3 of Enterprise was really good. It started getting good when they started going after the, what is it, the Xindi. The Xindi, yeah. Jamal, there are people out there that think plants feel pain and will only eat the fruit and vegetables that detach from the plant. Yeah. Yeah, I heard, who said that? I've heard a few people say it, but I've also heard Fresco say it, Jack Fresco. I've heard Jack Fresco say it. I'm skeptical of that one, but I don't know. I don't know. If we're all growing just the meat, what if they start growing human meat? Oh God, future chicken is people. It's so gross to me. Like the meat growing thing just seems so nasty. I don't know what it is. That being said, I don't know why it would be any nastier than killing an animal, ripping the flesh off the animal, eating it like a caveman. I don't see the difference. And yet one is profoundly gross, that was grosser than the other. I did watch Stargate. Stargate was good. Stargate was really good. Soylent Green is people. Soylent Green is people. Yeah, the ethics of this stuff gets interesting, man. Because you have to understand that anything that you do is going to have magnificent ramifications. Yeah, anything that you do is going to have magnificent ramifications. The reason why they're so strict from the standpoint of the law on this is because of that reason. Like, you are a galactic civilization that are on multiple planets, and with all those multiple planets, think of the governments from the standpoint of Earth. But I think you need to be a united planet before you can join the Federation of Planets. I don't think the last argument applies, only because it's those were planets within the Federation, not planets that they were being discovered. But still, yeah. Jamal lives on Soylent Green and French fries. Just the Soylent Green, man. No French fries. No French fries. I love Stargate as a kid. What about my question? What's your question, Moni? Let's see. Where are you, Moni? I couldn't watch past 3 episodes of Enterprise. Oh, really? So, Trudy, you didn't like it? What's your question, Moni? I don't see your question. Oh, here we are. And what about when they brought a whale back in time and McCoy cures the people in the hospital? They were more advanced because they were from the future. Oh, was it right that McCoy did that? No, it wasn't right that McCoy did that. Now, those people got lucky, yes. But what if McCoy miscalculated? And what if, in miscalculating, he started some kind of virus or illness or something, or that a doctor who was analyzing what McCoy was doing ends up using the research but doesn't quite understand what he's using and creates a plague that wipes out most of humanity and destroys all of time and space. What about that? What about that as a storyline? That's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. No, I'm joking. We could agree to off ourselves at prime conditions, say 50-ish, and feed ourselves the animals. That would be a fair deal. Look, if your society came up with that, then you would think that would be normal as normal could be. If you were born into a society that said love is free, meaning there's no such thing as this person is with this person or wed to this person or owns this person. If you want to have sex with that person, have at it. If they're game. If they're not, you move on to your devices. You may couple, you may create triplets. You create the family structure you want to create. The world is good. Nobody cares. Free sex, free love. I would say there's probably pot and drugs and everything else, but for the most part, I would wager that the drug crime and everything else would be low, depending on the conditions and economic conditions. Let's say at 50, you got into a device that obliterated you, and your ashes was given to your family, and you lived your life. Now, if you were born into that culture, you would think that was perfectly normal and perfectly natural. And not just perfectly normal and perfectly natural. You wouldn't think one iota of it being weird or off. The moment that somebody tries to put on a shirt or a nipple, they'll be like, what's wrong with that person? I don't like that new fashion. I don't like those people trying to cover up. I think it's body shaming. I think they're trying to shame the bodies of the people in the society, making them cover up in this way. What about the device? It's like, well, I don't want to die at 50. Well, you're trying to be a burden on the society, buddy. Why do you want to be a burden on the society? I mean, after all, we're trying to have a society. Our society functions in a way it does. We have all of these freedoms. You have all of these things that you can choose. And are you telling me that you yourself want to buck this trend and you want to become a burden on our precious society? It's fucking random. None of it means anything. None of it matters. All of that stuff is just culture. It's fucking not real. It's not real at all. It's like a program. The people will fight and defend whatever they grew up into and was used to and accustomed to. They do it uncritically, unthinkingly. If that was your reality, that would be a reality. If you were in a reality where you would steal women from one another like you were from tribes or something, then you would steal women from one another like you were from tribes. You would be propagated in whatever society you were propagated in. Your ethics, your society, your all that stuff. It's just your ethical ideas are going to come from the society itself. I mean, after all, you're in a capitalistic system where people are sleeping on the fucking streets. Where are the ethics of people sleeping on the streets? Where are the ethics of that? You have enough wealth to get rid of poverty 7 times over. They don't get rid of poverty. They have the capacity to do it. They just don't do it. It's a choice. It's a complete choice. We choose to allow people to literally lay and defecate on our streets, as opposed to making sure they have somewhere to stay. And even when we do create housing, it's projects. It's like a black mark that we put on the people who are in those conditions, as if being poor is somehow horrific and their fault. It's like criminalizing and penalizing the poor. It's like, what the it's like fucking sadists. It's fucking sadists. Do no harm principle will stop divergent ideas. I don't think it would stop divergent ideas. It's just talking about physical harm. That's right. People fight for what they grew up in. So radical change for us is nothing more than incrementalism. If you want true radical change, you need a radically different system. See, sorry, Jamal. The Prime Directive says we can't go in and help those poor people. That would be interfering with the internal development of a city. No. No, mofo. No. This is our matters. Like, we can't go in for the standpoint of a civilization, but we are a civilization. We are one civilization. That's us. That's all. That's total. It's us. We're just one. We're just one. There's no deviation between who I am and who you are. Ultimately, you are who you are because of the societal factors that made you who you are, and I am the same. Neither of us are special. My point in this is, a city is not a culture in and of itself, meaning, yeah, there may be people there of different stripes and everything else, but ultimately all of us are human beings, and all of that supersedes any of it. I can go to the farthest tribe in Africa, in the boonies, in the absolute bush that rarely sees the light of day, and I can find the darkest person that's standing in the corner, and he would smile in a similar way that I would, and he would laugh when there would be something that would be funny to him. Ultimately, those things are just human. We're human beings. Like, it's not, it's like it's ingrained in us. We're so fucking similar. That was a joke, Jamal. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Plant more seeds in Jamal's mind to go against democracy. Look, Clemente, when my friends and I created a tiny house village for, formerly homeless people, we insisted it would be located in a residential neighborhood, not in the edge of town. Yeah. Somewhere where it's nice as opposed to being in a shitty spot. Learn social justice. The Prime Directive is laissez-faire social Darwinism. It is not. What are you talking about? I think you're fucking with me. It is not laissez-faire social Darwinism. You understand that the Star Trek universe, for the most part, went with this idea of, let me say it this way. you know, of all the things that plague human beings, the main thing and the main driver to this stuff is the issue of work. Who does the work? Who's going to do the work? Somebody needs to eat. Somebody needs a house. Somebody needs a whatever. Who's going to do the work? Now, ultimately, that question has been answered based on this kind of economic system that we've arranged ourselves in. But it's an odd system because we've decided to give large amounts to a very small percentage of people and call that freedom. Think about it. Working 50 hours a week for somebody to give them your surplus labor, your surplus value. Going back home, wasted, tired. It's nighttime. There's nothing else you can do. You get up and you do the same thing the very next day. And the president of the United States, be it Obama or Trump or Bush or Clinton, would get up and proclaim thunderously, to thunderous applause, that this is freedom and democracy. You are working at a company where you have no control over anything that takes place in the company. It is a totalitarian regime. And you stay there for hours on end. And you're supposed to have some level of freedom in this process. Your boss acts as if he's just an ordinary, everyday guy, just like you, despite the fact that he's a plutocrat, depending on the companies. There's some companies where the guys, in my old company, they used to walk around with you as if they were just like you. It's like, hey, I'm just like you. I'm just like one of the guys. Just so happen I'm a capitalist. Look, the point I'm making here is that's not the Star Trek reality. The Star Trek reality went a different way with this, with the idea that technology should work at the behest of human beings, not at the behest of a top 1% that's somewhat rapacious, that's using it for their own ends. There's a difference in those things. It's not laissez-faire capitalism. Balthazar, USDA cuts mean no more Prime Directive only choice. Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. No more Prime Directive only choice. The USDA, I hope you get that. Oh God, I hope they get that. I hope they get that. Luca Clemente, question: who would deliver monologues in the future? A clones of Jamal Thomas. Oh God, that would be hilarious. We need 100% care. What we need is a system that says, get rid of the labor. Get rid of the labor. Your labor is your problem. Get rid of the labor. What is the point of life if that life is not worth living? Like, what's really the point if you can't necessarily enjoy your life and do your own pursuits? I would strongly wager that if you could get up in the morning and do what you want to do as opposed to what you're being forced to do, you would have a different fucking life. You have a different fucking life. Let me end this because I'm supposed to have an interview with Blumenthal. Let me make sure he's still doing it. So if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the Patreon. I may be back momentarily. Hopefully Max is on the other line. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.